everybody. My name is Alex. My background is developing high-volume consumer electronics. That's why we're all here. So in this presentation, I'm going to share how we usually develop things, how we help our clients fundraise, to raise money for their products, and how to bring their ideas into mass production and sell a lot of units here at CES. A few words about myself. I've been doing this for over a decade, developing high-volume products. We designed, managed, and launched over 40 projects with over 50 million in sales. And I'm the CEO of AJProTech. We are a product development company in Los Angeles, California, with a development and production center in Taiwan. What I'm going to talk today is, we're just going to cover how economy affects hardware products, how to develop new products, how to fundraise, and how to turn new ideas into mass producible units. We have a lot to cover, so I'm just going to go fast, and we're going to have a quick Q&A at the end. Few projects I'm going to be referring to in the course of this presentation is few of our projects: AR headset, industrial headphones, and a Bluetooth smart lock. No need to take notes, everything is online. Just go to our website, and this entire presentation is going to be online. Why hardware is hard? You probably heard that. Probably, essentially a lot of moving parts with the long lead times. They're expensive, and if you make mistakes, they're very costly. So you want to do things right at the first time. What's good in the hardware world in the last couple of years? The negative part is semiconductor shortage affected all of us. Many components are unable to get or come with long lead times. The trade tension between US and China is causing a lot of difficulty to create and launch new products. Venture capital slowdown affecting startups. It's harder to raise money traditionally, and conflict in Europe just causing a lot of talent shortage. On the bright side, their supply chain is slowly improving. We see, some improvement in the lead time for critical semiconductors. So overall, it is faster to ship new products this year compared to last couple of years. Logistics is also getting better. The ocean freight is getting better. Latest events in the Red Sea might be again disrupting a little bit, but overall we see improvement in logistics. And the big part is more talent go to deep tech. Basically, more investment going into deep, hard tech areas with longer investment horizons. While its capital market shrinks and B2B and B2C software companies don't bring those fast returns anymore, and investors are more willing to take bets on their more long-term and important strategic companies, especially in the IoT, electric vehicles, battery, robotics, semiconductors, and material innovation. So those are good areas to look at this year. Essentially, it is harder to raise money, but if you do raise money, you have less competition, and you gain a lot of competitive edge. And tech layoffs in the US, big companies, help a lot of laid off employees create new startups. So in the next 5-10 years, we're going to see a lot of companies created by people who left their job at big companies in last year and this year. Let's talk about fundraising. You need some funds to develop new products. So what options do we have? The first thing that comes to mind is crowdfunding. When you put your product out there and you pre-sell, essentially you pre-sell your product and to thousands or to millions of people. The pros of crowdfunding is you get organic customer base. Is great for marketing, and you don't have one big investor, you have more smaller investors. On the con side, it is becoming expensive. Crowdfunding is a pay-to-play game. You have to invest in marketing, you have to invest in materials, you have to invest in an email list to get some attention. The cost of mistake is high. If you don't raise your target money, it's going to be extremely hard to raise money from VCs. So think twice before you rush into crowdfunding. Make sure, get some advice from people who've done that, and make sure you set your goal low enough so you can hit that. Again, if you put your product for crowdfunding and you don't raise the target amount, it might be very hard to raise capital from investors later on, because what happens on the internet stays on the internet forever. And another part is, when you put your product for crowdfunding, you're going to have a lot of competition. In many cases, we've seen it firsthand when our clients put their products for crowdfunding. Some of factories from Asia and from other countries might beat you to market. You show it out there, they beat you to market, and because it's some of the crowdfunding companies, they do it for the first time, while factories can do it efficiently. So be careful with how early you go into crowdfunding. Another possibility for investment is getting some grants, either government grants or local grants. There are some federal and state programs. Some of you guys came here to CES, we support federal governments. Federal governments are great because they're usually non-dilutive. They take a lot of time to get through, but it's the easiest money you can get long-term, because government usually don't take percentage in your company. A lot of times you can get some seed funding from corporations. If you are, for example, a logistics company and you're developing a new tracker, you might get some funding from the corporate partner who might be interested in doing a pilot program with you. Since we're working, so I'm going to keep going, and then we're going to switch the mic at some point. Right. So, and final part is a venture capital. So venture capital is not easy to get. So our typical recommendation is, unless you're really going into expensive development, don't rush into VCs too early. Requires a lot of time. You're going to spend months and months for development. Maybe once you get your proof of concept, that is the time to get to the venture capital. Where to go to? One of my favorite is angel investors. So angel investors are typically guys who've done well in the industry. Look for someone who's been successful in the industry. Maybe they sold the company, maybe they've done some good work, and they do allocate some capital. They understand your niche, and they don't just give you money, they also give you strategic advice, and you can leverage their brand. Having someone, for example, if you're doing something for their performance industry and you have some musician or the movie guy or girl, it might be really good for your brand. So they do support you more, and it's usually much faster to close. It's smaller checks. You can expect somewhere sometimes, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, not millions. So, but angel investors are great to get started and to get your money fast. All right, let's talk about development. So you got some money, and by the way, one of the things we see recently is companies traditionally were trying to raise substantial seed round before they even have a product. What we see recently, try to raise as small money as possible. Try to be very lean. Try to bootstrap your business. Don't try to raise too much too early. Prove your concept and then go into raising big bucks. Product development. So it's a long process to develop and launch new product. So having the roadmap, having the path to production is essential. So this is, one of the variations how to look at the product development. This is one of my favorites. You always start with a problem research. What problem are you solving? Who is your customer? Why do you want this? What solution might solve the problem? Don't try to find the problem. Don't try to find a solution first and then look for a problem. Look for what is missing, what exact problem people might have, and then look for a solution. One of the good ways to look for ideas for your product, you might have worked in some capacity in a company and you saw some specific unique need in the industry. So try to go in the industry where you have some competitive edge, where you might know someone or something that others don't. Before you go and start spending a lot of money, try to do some very early prototypes. They should be ugly, they should be fast, but they should prove your core concept. Before you start doing pretty enclosures, pretty PCBs, and going to trade shows, do something ugly, show it to people who's your target audience. Don't talk to your friends and family, or would you buy it? Go to talk to your ideal client. If your client is an enterprise, try to find some people from the enterprise. Don't ask your mom or dad or sister, because they're going to support you. They're going to say they love it, but it doesn't mean that your target audience is going to buy it. So talking to right people early is essential to get their feedback, and don't ask them to buy. Ask them to give you feedback about your idea for the product. After you've done your initial proof of concept, you go through engineering prototypes, validation, design validation. Overall, you can expect anywhere from 1 to 2 years from idea to product on the shelf. So it's a long journey. Fasten your seatbelt. All the companies start product development differently. We start with a process we call feasibility study. It is essentially, it's the time for us. It goes for a couple months. So when companies come to us, and how do we start? We always tell, here's a feasibility study. Let's do the following. Let's research You have an idea. You want to solve a certain problem. Let's find solutions for the problem. Let's prepare product requirement documents, specification. You heard that word, right? But usually people put, just a few words on a napkin and call it specification. Specification is a single most important document that's going to follow you for the rest of your product development. So this is going to be a live document. You don't need to put it all at the same time, but start putting very precise document. And I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes. Doing early industrial design, seeing is believing. So how the product is going to look, and doing the cost estimates. So before you start spending a lot on engineering, you must calculate how much approximately it's going to cost. Let's dive into it. When we do research for the problem, we look at what available products are available on the market, even though they might be from different industries. For example, you might be doing some wellness device, but there might be some similar products in the medical sphere. Or you might be doing something for consumers, but something similar is available for industrial. Don't just look into your niche, look wider. What core technology do you plan to use, and is that technology used in other industries in a similar capacity? I was talking about the specification. So specification usually is a document with 10, 20 pages long. So when you start, you describe what does your product need to do, how people are going to use it, and eventually you start going really detailed. If you don't know something, that's okay. Just put TBD in there. The unknown is the worst. So, and good PRD contains things like operational conditions, how a unit can be stored, what's the battery life should be. And eventually, this is the thing that every factory is going to ask you, the PRD. So this document, start with that, and it's going to be evolving as you go. As we do feasibility study, we don't do too much engineering, but we always do functional diagram. So on a device level, what are the big parts that are going to be inside your product? And it also goes inside your PRD. And then you go down to the PCB level. So what are the core components are required for your product? It needs a microcontroller, it needs a memory. You have it in your mind, it needs to be there, but it's always the best to put it in writing. So when you get some employees, or you get some factory, you get some investors on board, you must show them this functional diagram so everyone is absolutely clear and absolutely on the same page. If you do create prototypes, my advice is don't use Arduinos, just get some evaluation boards instead. And the reason is, when you use Arduino, you spend a lot of time, but then as you go further in your development process, you usually have to start over. So instead of spending time and money on doing, those fast prototypes on Arduinos, usually, get the evaluation boards. Time you're going to spend for development is going to be very similar, but it's going to get you much further and much faster to your final product eventually. Another thing we do as a part of our feasibility study is cost estimate. Again, we are very early in the process, but you want to understand what's coming later down the line. Analyze the critical components that go inside your product. Just from the microcontroller to connectors to batteries. So you start putting together a list of the components that go inside. And if you fundraising, your investors are going to ask you how much your product is going to cost. They don't need your prototype in most cases, but they need to know that you know your cost per unit early. And if the core technology is unproven, if you're not sure it's going to work, it's good to create some really rapid prototypes. They should be extremely ugly. They should be done in a matter of hours, days. Don't spend months and months on them. This is an example. During COVID, we've been working on a product like a mask with some built-in fans. We've done it in hours, literally. So just to make sure that it has potential, that it's not too heavy, that we can have enough airflow inside the mask. This was done in a matter of hours, not months and not weeks. If you do create prototypes, use evaluation boards instead of Arduinos. Much further and more manufacturer-friendly approach. Of feasibility, at the end of this initial process, you need to document everything you learned. So you analyze some components, the cost, put together a document describing how you solve the problem. So you're going to get some design team on board, you're going to get some employees. So having your finding documented is really, really critical. And also, one last thing that, people are very visual. They want to see things. So even though you're working on an ugly board and, just, it's working, you need to show people something to get them excited. And, picture says 1,000 words. So we do, as a part of our feasibility study, we do sketching. So we start with, look for the form, basically. If we develop in something, should it be round, should it be rectangular, should it be a sphere, or should it be a cone? 10 to 15 different sketches done really fast. Then two or four of them are selected for further work. They can be further refined, and eventually we create high quality renders. So at the end of this process, you validated. You know how much your product is going to cost, your per unit cost. You know what components need to go inside, and you know how it's going to look. So this is the package. So if you're fundraising, that might be the time to go to fundraising. And if you're really trying to win someone over, you might create, they call look-like prototypes. They don't work, no components inside, but they show how a unit is going to feel. For example, if you're developing a smartwatch, just making a dummy enclosure with LCD display is gonna get people to understand your product better. If you work with a distributed team, make sure you hold your meetings a lot, communicate frequently, and align all the parties on main points. When we work with companies, we hold weekly meetings, we get a presentation, and then you can look back and understand how you come to certain decisions. So everything you do must be documented, so you have some retrospective approach. You know your product cost. You build your ugly prototypes. Let's talk about making something that you all like, making a beautiful engineering samples. Usually on this phase, you need to validate all critical components. After you've done your prototype, it's going to be the best time to raise money from investors, and you create a small number of units using rare prototyping methods. There's no tooling, unit cost is going to be high, and it might be looking slightly different from production units, but the goal here is that your engineering samples meet your specification. You remember we discussed the PRD? So the goal at the end of this phase should be that your units, they do meet the specs you put together for yourself. I'm going to refer to another project of ours, which was their adapter for Microsoft Surface keyboard. And we were doing a lot of prototyping for that project. And we do a lot of iteration. Instead of doing one pretty board that's taking months and months, we just go quickly. We break things, we make them work, and then we make them pretty. So the first prototypes should be done in a matter of days. Get some wires, just connect them. The second one might be slightly prettier. The third one, you do the board in the rectangular big form factor in a big bulky enclosure, and then you put it in a form factor. Doing this way, you can get a lot of information and a lot of knowledge, and you can iterate quickly. Instead of spending months and months for development, do a lot of small iterations as you go and adapt. Test ideas weekly. Ideally, if you can, you want to make one prototype per week. And I'm not saying you should do the complete device per week. You should test one specific thing every single day. If your device have buttons, try different buttons every day. If your device has joysticks, try different joysticks. If you test a display, get different displays. Every week or every day, ideally, you want to build another version of your prototype to go through a lot of testing. This is the time to do it. After this phase, you will not have luxury of doing a lot of pivoting. This is another example of us doing development. So don't try to optimize it for size too early. So we start with evaluation boards, matter of a couple of weeks. Then we get their add-on boards that goes on evaluation boards. Then we make the development board in a bigger form factor, and eventually we come to the small unit. This way, your units are much easier to troubleshoot. You don't that unit on the right is small. It's going to be hard, and it's going to take some time. The unit on the left, the green board, taking us, couple days to, and if we need to change it, we do it quickly. So do a lot of small iterations instead of just going all in and doing one great black board. On this phase, you expect anywhere from 2 to 3 PCB iterations, and external wires and patch boards are totally acceptable. The goal is to make it work, not to make it look pretty. Some design tips, use pre-certified modules when you can. It just helps you with your compliance later on. And when you select components, try to use components which are widely available. If you are looking for Qualcomm, MediaTek, Realtek components, and your email doesn't end with .apple, you might have a hard time reaching the support. So they're great, they're high performance, but it's extremely hard to work, especially if you work for a startup. So pick your components wisely, and big brands are extremely hard to get support from. So Qualcomm is one of the, we love Qualcomm, they're high performance, but they're mostly geared towards enterprises doing development of new products. Some design tips, hard components to get for the last couple of years were SD Micro text instruments. We switched all of them to ESP32s, Nordic, and Atmel components. And yeah, by the way, there is a big market called China, and they have a lot of components which you might not even know. So they have a lot of alternatives. So sometimes when you cannot find the parts from the reputable brands, you can find alternatives. So they are usually on the local market, so it's hard to find them. But if you can afford having a local agent to look for components for you, you might be surprised how many components, never leave China at all. So they're only used for local market, and you can find them and use them inside your product. We published an article on Forbes about their logistics and what to expect. So if you're interested, here's a great piece of media we put on Forbes recently. Let's talk about mechanical. So it was all electrical, all great. Let's talk about mechanical. Mechanical parts require expensive tooling. So you want to do things right. You don't rush into, production too soon. So when you have your industrial design, so think about what is the most cost-efficient way to produce it. Sometimes it means breaking your big design into few smaller pieces, which are easier to produce, especially on a prototype stage. So this was our entire structure. We split it into, few dozen units, which are easier to produce, especially on a prototype stage. When we develop prototypes, these are our three good friends: 3D printing, CNC machining, and silicon molding. 3D prints are amazing, they're fast, they're a little bit ugly, but the quality of 3D prints is raising. So if you're developing something, 3D printer should be your best friend. You should, go to bed and put your printer to print something. CNC machining allows you to create higher quality prototypes. So, when you carve the entire piece from a solid piece of plastic, when we create prototypes which we bring to CES, we usually do CNC machining. And the final one is one of my personal favorites, is silicon mold. So when you need to create some really good looking samples without spending tens of thousands on tooling, silicon mold is great. Meaning that it's the same principle as injection molding, but instead of using a metal part, you create silicon and you pour your metal plastic in that. That can give you very high fidelity prototypes at very reasonable cost. And some vendors can do it for you. And one good part about doing silicon molding is that your design mentality will be closer to what you're going to be doing during the injection molding. In 3D printing, you can do anything. When you do silicon molding, you have to think about how that part is going to go inside the mold and go out of the mold. And this is an example of what we've done with silicon molding, really high quality, great looking parts. And since we were doing, a little bit higher volume of those samples, silicon mold was a great fit. For anywhere from 10 to 100 units, silicon molding is one of my personal favorites. Much cheaper than doing CNC machining at high quality. At this phase, during the prototyping, you start developing modules which go inside your product. So think about the modularity. So if certain things, need to be replaced, for example, a good example is the fuse in your car. You want to make them accessible. Or if something, is prone to break, for example, your product might contain a fan for cooling, and that fan might have a shorter lifetime than the rest. Think about how this part can be replaced and serviced. Your team will learn a lot from assembling the first product. Even though it might be tempting to go to manufacturer, do it for me, we highly advise to be very hands-on with assembly. Your team must be looking at the units and trying different things when they do assemble the first prototypes. You write and debug the firmware, you make it work, and at the end you have final engineering prototypes. Many of people bring them to trade shows. Some people bring them to crowdfunding. This is the place and time to start showing your product to not just for your early adopters, but for a little bit wider audience to get a more feedback. Sometimes your prototypes might look slightly different. You might have some limitations of technologies. For example, this product right here is a headphones, and we could not get their exact plastic we need to get. So we've done it from different plastic, and eventually when we go into production, we use the same design but with different material. So you have your prototype. Next, what? You go into engineering validation called EVT. You can get your engineering prototypes to begin your EVT. Usually, you're going to build a few more iterations as you go, as you test. You're going to find that your product is missing something, and you're going to build in a few more rounds of prototypes. And the single most important word here is test, 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 test. You must be testing for everything. Usually, you do functional testing, you do power testing, thermal, AMI. You should get a lot of testing done on this product early. So to understand that it's not just working and working sometimes, it's working reliably. And usually you build anywhere from 20 to 50 units on this phase to do a lot of those functional tests. Your final boards might look like something like this. Functional testing is, essentially is to testing every single feature you have on your PRD. So wireless communication, power node, battery charging, every single piece that your users are going to be doing with the product must be tested here. Wireless and antenna testing, one of the most underestimated pieces. So there is a thing called FCC in the US, and every product that you want to sell legally in this country must go through compliance. So you want to, if you're using certified module, it's going to be slightly easier. You just pay a little bit less. But if you are developing from scratch, if you're doing your antenna and your wireless circuitry, you must be doing some wireless testing. Thermal camera should be the best friend. So if your product is running hot, it's going to have shorter lifetime. So thermal cameras are really expensive, and they can tell you a lot about your product. So you want to look what are the hot points in your product and can you make them cooler. The cooler it runs, the longer it's going to work. So thermal cameras are a really inexpensive way to predict where your product might break. And at the end of EVT phase, your core components must be locked. There are no substantial changes to components after EVT. If something is not working, you go again, you do one more round, and you retest. Next part is, as we go into DVT, the focus shifts from development to manufacturing. This is the time to engage heavily with your manufacturer. So we're going to talk about the manufacturer selection, and for manufacturing portion, I'm going to bring a good friend of ours, Terry from CComp, one of the best contract manufacturers, and to talk about the manufacturing a little bit later. So what do you do on the DVT phase? You start selecting manufacturer, and we're going to talk about how to do that. You do a lot of the final validation, and you start doing tooling. That is the time when you start spending tens of thousands on tooling, so you can start building your products in a cost-efficient way. The question you ask yourself at the end is, does my product meet all requirements? Meaning functional, cosmetic, environmental, everything. It's not just working, it's working and it's looking great. Let's talk about the manufacturer, the big elephant in the room. So how do you pick the good partner to work with you? Having a great CM, might be really helpful for your product. So, unit prototypes, what to do next? You start with looking for a list of maybe 10 to 12 CM. Sites like Alibaba or conferences like CES are a great way to engage with a lot of manufacturers. So you put a list of 10 to 12 manufacturers who work in a similar industry as your product. Someone doing electric bike might not be as good for your smartwatch product. In those 10 to 12 manufacturers, you might come down to about 5 to come to request for quotation. And typically it's you review their products, you ensure they don't do something too similar. So if you're doing something really unique, And you might want to make sure the factory is not working with your direct competitors. You sign the NDA, go through the request for quotation process. And at the end, you must visit the factory. You must be there. You must talk to them. You must see the floor. You must talk to the people. So never select solely on price, and always have backup option. If you think you found a great CM, it's great, but always have your plan B in mind. And where your product might be manufactured. So for typical consumer electronic product, which is very price sensitive, manufacturing outside China is challenging, even though some options do appear. High margin electronics or medical devices might be produced in countries like Taiwan and Japan or Korea, amazing markets for more expensive, more premium electronics. If you are in the medical, aerospace, or military hardware, manufacturing domestically in the US might be a great choice, because you have a little bit easier path to government contracts and to work with big corporations if you manufacture those things domestically. Once you have a factory, you start going through a process called design for manufacturing. This is the time when you work on the color, finishing material. You ensure that all your material is selected. You start doing optimization for tooling. Factory is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. So if you decide to change factory later on, it might be required to redo the process, because every factory has their own process. So spend your time wisely when you select a factory, and once you have them, stick with them for ideally forever. The language of talking to factory is Excel. Whatever language you speak, English, Korean, any Spanish, any other language, the language to talk to factory is Excel. You put things in Excel, you put a picture, put a word in, it should be really concise, it should be as easy to understand as anyone who's looking at your blog for the first time must be able to understand, the core things you're trying to do here. And at the end of DBT, you have anywhere from 10 to 50 samples, and you go through more testing. Functional, including usability, how easy it is to use your product. Performance, including burn-in test, meaning that, if your product is running for a long time, does it work reliably? Climatic, it's a cold, hot, and various humidity. So hot chamber should be your thermal chamber should be a good friend here. You don't shock vibration, so if your product might be exposed to some vibration, you want to put that on a shaking machine and do accelerated agent testing, and a lot of the EMC and USD testing. At the end of DBT, you usually go through compliance, meaning FCC, ULC, depending on the target market. Factory is going to be driving most of the effort here, because it is when you come to those testing, you usually want to use samples coming from the factory you're working with. And I was saying test. This is an example of the thermal chamber. Everything you do should be tested in different temperatures. If it works in room temperature reliably, it doesn't mean it's going to work when it's hot outside or it's cold outside. Do a lot of testing together with the factory, right? And it was an exciting journey, and you finally come to a place where you're ready to put your first order for production. When the factory starts manufacturing, they usually do final production validation or PVT, and during that phase, factory is doing most of the heavy lifting. So, and on this phase, I would like to bring Terry to talk about what factory is doing before they can start mass production.
We decided to manufacture industrial, medical, and consumer electronics, both at our factory in Guangdong, China, our new factory in Tijuana, Mexico. If you have any questions about manufacturing in China or in Mexico, or just manufacturing electronics generally, feel free to come up and ask after the talk here. For production validation, we are really going through, after all of the EVT and the EVT work that Alex described so well, we are really setting up the entire production process for the first time. So not just finalizing the product, all the different individual parts and components, the process of making them, the process of programming them, testing and doing final packaging. So to make sure that ultimately after all of the hard work that the entrepreneur and the product development firm have done to get the product ready for production, that what we were actually producing in volume meets all of your product requirements that you talked about, meets all of your cosmetic requirements that you talked about, and all of the quality controls that we put in place to meet your expectations. Yeah, and then of course after this, once we have the product and the process completely dialed in, then things we'll continue to do on an ongoing basis would be setting up and optimizing the supply chain, so making sure that the components we're buying from the vendors we're buying them from are correct, are quality, arrive on time, they're at the right price, and then can we do an ongoing negotiation with those suppliers to reduce costs, or to reduce lead time. We are, of course, always doing production planning as well. So we've got, you may have 100 different components or 300 different components that go into the manufacturing of your products, and we need all of them. 299 out of 300 components is not enough. So we need to make sure we're planning every single component to be in the factory at the right time, make sure we have the resources, both human resources and equipment resources scheduled for that production, have it aligned. One way we do this time is this last point, spot buyers versus buying from manufacturers. So sometimes your lowest cost for a component purchase would be if you're able to wait lead times. Maybe it's 12 weeks or 20 weeks to get a component at the lowest cost. But let's say you have CES, you got to get some parts out, meet the trade show. We may have to pay a higher price for those components through a distributor so we can get them in 2 weeks or 4 weeks as opposed to waiting 12 or 20. This is a really, really critical part. Both jigs and test fixtures, not only for the PCB level kind of management test fixture for the complete product electronics, but really fixturing and test tubes throughout the assembly process. Every single product, every assembly of every single product is unique, and what you will get, a lot of the value that you will get from the factory who has a lot of experience building the types of products that you have to make. They will know how to very simply, quickly, and cheaply make jigs and fixtures to have your product be tested and assembled in an efficient, reliable, repeatable manner.
Want to take this? Mass production?
For a opportunity that we are looking for from a customer, we're looking for $1 million in revenue with potential upside after that to grow. So one of the points that you made out earlier about your CM selection, this is really, really important. You need to make sure that you're choosing the make that is aligned in the size or business you plan your business to grow. You have a CM that says they want $1 million in business, you are only doing $250,000. That CM is either not going to take your business, or if you say, no, going to get to $1 million or $2 million, and after a year or two, you haven't reached that threshold, you run the risk as a business owner of having your manufacturing interest stop supporting your business. Now suddenly you're in a position where you have to find an alternate manufacturer. It takes time, it takes money, it's really complex, and can really jeopardize your business. So finding a CM that is the right size for you is really, really, really important. Quite often $1 million would be 10,000 units or more. Producing products that cost $1. Very, very small, very inexpensive products. We may do 3 or 4 or 5 million of those per year. There's some other things that are more expensive that doesn't take units to reach that $1 million threshold. Once you establish those things, we'll do a full run, we'll ramp, we will constantly, as a production team, do failure and yield analysis, continue trying to optimize logistics, supply chain, and manufacturing costs.
And our study was saying, typically people ask what mass production means. And, just echoing what Terry was saying, that usually for a lot of good factories, there is a minimum, not a minimum order, but the minimum amount of money going through them. And for many good factories, it can be around $1 million, meaning that if your product costing you around $100 to build, you need to order at least 10,000 units a year to compel the manufacturer to work with you. There are some smaller factories that can you work with, and they also can be great. Always align your size of your business to the size of the factory you want to deal with. And how do you get your product from your factory to the shelves? Usually you go for sea. So, and as you plan your delivery dates, the sea freight is the cheapest way to get there. And it's usually taking, a couple months, depending on the exact destinations. So plan for a couple months, and sometimes it's acceptable to air freight some of your goods from trade shows. But when you are in mass production, you must be using sea unless you sell it really expensive, low volume products. A few words about how we can help as a company. As I mentioned, we do product development, and we work with a lot of companies, helping them create new innovative hardware products faster. We usually step in early. We do feasibility study, we do prototyping, we do electrical mechanical engineering, and we make introductions to good manufacturers we work with. We do low volume in-house builds, and then we work with factories like Seacom to produce at scale. Our process is we have three offerings. We have planning. Our feasibility study is when we analyze components, we build the PRD with you, and we give you kick-ass industrial design. We build engineering prototypes you can take to trade shows, you can take them to investors, and we can support you go into scale manufacturing. If you want to connect with me, here's my information, here's my email, here's my LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. I'll be happy to stay here and answer any questions you might have. You've been an awesome audience. Thank you so much, and have a great CES. There is no universal approach, but usually, I'll put it this way. Some companies make things that go well with other solutions. Some things are not. So if you're developing a software, usually develop SDK for developers, right? And you put it right there because you want other parties to work with you. Some of the hardware products, they might not have that at all. And when you're trying to make your software work with those hardware companies who didn't plan to work with the third parties, it might be extremely painful. So the best way to look is to ask manufacturer if they do have a support for third-party developers. And it's usually very straightforward. If they do so, we can find that on the website. Again, not every company doing hardware or software is meant to be working with others. So just ask directly. And what we've seen in many cases, when you're trying to, I'm going to give an example. We've been developing their mapping software for a startup, and there are a few mapping companies out there, and some of them, do have a great API to work with, right? So, and they just claim it on the website. We're meant to be integrated. While others, they might be slightly more beneficial, but they are very painful. So instead of going through all the hoops, you're a startup, right? So you wanna move fast. You wanna take the software or the hardware that has a clear, documented way to be integrated with other components.